Gary Cohn is a top White House official, head of the president's National Economic Council, former Goldman Sachs executive, and he's somebody who is trusted by Wall Street and the markets. So what he says, what he does, and whether he stays in the job, a very big deal here in Washington, which is why Cohn kind of set off shockwaves with a couple of things. The New York Times reporting that he'd actually drafted a letter of resignation in the wake of Charlottesville. Of course, everyone knows neo-Nazis, KKK, white supremacists were shouting anti-Semitic slogans as they marched and created the violence there in the Virginia college town. And Gary Cohn is one of the top officials who happens to be Jewish. He, of course, decided not to submit that resignation letter to the president, but he has spoken out in an interview with the Financial Times in which he addressed the violence in Charlottesville and, without using the president's name, indicated his unhappiness. So, among other things, Cohn said that citizens standing up for equality and freedom can never be equated with supremacists, neo-Nazis, and the KKK. I believe this administration can and must do better in consistently and unequivocally condemning these groups. So clearly, Cohn making absolutely plain that he was not entirely happy with the president's handling of Charlottesville. He went on to say, as a Jewish American, I will not allow neo-Nazis chanting, "Jews will not replace us," to cause this Jew to leave his job. Now, this caused a lot of questions at the White House briefing, and naturally, it's a little unusual when a member of the president's cabinet or a very senior advisor implicitly or otherwise criticizes what the boss did, especially on such a racially charged and sensitive issue as Charlottesville. I say, well, he's entitled to speak out, and then he can do one of several things. He can resign if he feels like he can no longer work for this president. He can stay on and decide it's more important, as he says, for him to do his job and not be driven out. Or he can stay on the job and voice. He didn't have to do this interview and say these things. He said he was under a lot of pressure, both among those who wanted him to quit and those who felt that he should stay. Some of that pressure comes from the media. There has been this drumbeat even before Charlottesville about, well, Donald Trump is such a erratic and incompetent president in the view of his critics that White House officials should just resign as a matter of conscience. There's a new Republic headline saying that very thing. But it seems to me that some special pressure has been applied to those in the administration who are Jewish, not just Gary Cohn, but obviously Jared Kushner is an Orthodox Jew, the president's son-in-law, and his wife, Ivanka Trump, is converted to Judaism, and there are others. So after Charlottesville, the New York Times had a headline that said, Jewish officials remain silent in the wake of Charlottesville. It wasn't entirely true. Ivanka, for example, put out a very explicit tweet condemning KKK, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists. But, as somebody who is Jewish, I wonder, should there be a special burden on people who are serving their government or working for the president who happen to be Jewish? Is there more responsibility on their shoulders to speak out or take on the person they work for or resign? Shouldn't all Americans be equally offended, not just by the anti-Semitic slogans, but by the racism and white supremacy of those who, were marching with torches and caused violence and caused the death of 32-year-old Heather Heyer? And so it seems to me that two things are happening here. The press, much of it not liking this president, feels that anybody around him should just quit because that's what they would do, and they don't sort of get the notion that maybe even if you don't agree with Donald Trump on everything, it's your responsibility to try to help run a good, solid government. And the second is that there's some special responsibility. I guess this happens with black officials when there's a racially charged incident. But I just am going to take the view that all Americans should be equally offended by what happened in Charlottesville, and every single person working for an administration or a governor or a mayor or another president beside Donald Trump has to make his or her own decision on whether it's more important to stay and try to do the job or to maybe make a big splash by resigning, but then the administration has lost your voice, has lost your special talents. I don't think the media should be imposing, urging, pressuring exhibiting disgust at those who decide to stay and work for their country. I just don't buy that. People are entitled to speak out, or they can leave, but they don't need to have the additional media pressure, which clearly, in many cases, is ideologically driven toward this president.